So how big was this calving event that we just looked at? We'll resort to some illustrations again to give you a sense of scale. It's as if the entire lower tip of Manhattan broke off, except that the thickness, the height of it, is equivalent to buildings that are 2.5 or 3 times higher than they are. That's a magical, miraculous, horrible, scary thing. I don't know that anybody's really seen the miracle and horror of that. It took 100 years for it to retreat 8 miles from 1900 to 2000. From 2000 to 2010, it retreated 9 miles. So in 10 years, it retreated more than it had in the previous 100.
First of all, we're going to look at the runaway behavior that is actually happening to the Arctic system, going almost exponential. We saw the rate of change of ice area accelerating. We saw the change in ice mass or thickness also accelerating and moving towards zero over the next 2 or 3 years. And taken all together, we have the unmistakable footprint of a system in what we call self-amplification or runaway behavior.
You may remember that in 2007 there was a big study that came out from this group called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they looked at computer models of how rapidly Arctic ice would go away. And as of early 2007, this is what they were telling us, that we would see gradual drop in Arctic ice minimum going down to where we'd probably still have a fair amount of ice left in the year 2100. Worst case, maybe by 2070 we would see open water in the Arctic in the summertime. That very same year, we saw in the actual observations a huge drop in the Arctic ice, and that drop has continued so that in 2012 this is now where we are. So we're something like 50 years ahead of the worst case scenarios that scientists were giving us just 5 or 6 years ago with Arctic ice.
I'm actually in agreement with many climate change deniers in that the IPCC is wrong. But I think they're actually wrong because they're too conservative. And they haven't really been telling the story of what really could happen.
Can you summarise the effect of an ice-free Arctic on the world?
Yes, the effect of an ice-free Arctic on the world is a very large one because it goes way beyond the Arctic itself. Because once the sea ice has disappeared, firstly, that produces a decrease in the global albedo, the amount of radiation reflected by the Earth, and has a knock-on effect in the sense that the warmer air masses in the Arctic in summer cause a retreat of the snow line, and the snow line decrease has just as big an effect on the albedo as the sea ice decrease has. So there's global albedo change, which affects the temperature of the entire planet. It warms it all up. And then there's the fact that as the sea ice retreats, it allows the water masses around the shelves of the Arctic to warm up, and that warms up the seabed and releases more methane from the subsea permafrost, which is melting away. And that methane itself is a very, very powerful greenhouse gas. So we're having a methane kick coming in from the retreat of the sea ice, which again is a global effect rather than simply an Arctic effect.
When the IPCC is it's not a whole load of people agreeing, it's a load of people saying, oh, it's this, it's this, it's this. It's just that nearly everybody thinks that we are warming the planet. They disagree about how fast it'll happen. They disagree about whether negative or positive feedbacks are going to be more important.
This is one of the more conservative scientific bodies on the planet. They work by consensus, And after the scientists reach consensus, they then vet their report through the political process. So politicians have to sign off on the IPCC's assessment before it's released, and they conclude that we've reached runaway in the absence of geoengineering.
And this is not in the model. The models don't show this happening. This is happening. So what happens when we update the models so that it does reflect that the Arctic is melting?
So we're seeing effects. And one of the primary effects that grabs most people's attention is what's happening with the Arctic sea ice, the ice that's floating on the Arctic Ocean. It covers usually most of the Arctic Ocean. Last year, 2012, was the record low, is the lowest Arctic summer ice that we have seen ever since we've been observing it.
Whereas the rest of the globe has cooled since 1997, temperature in the Arctic has started to increase, and increase increasingly rapidly. The hotter it gets, the faster it gets hotter.
2007 alone, in 1 year, it melted more than the previous year by an area equal to 3 times the size of California. And it will be all gone in 5 or 10 years.
It's pretty clear from the death spiral, that's the way in which the volumes of ice in the summer are zeroing in towards zero, that the ice can't last more than a couple more years.
There's no way that ice mass at the end of September can continue going round this circle for the next 5 decades. It's moving very rapidly into the 0 point in the center. It's been decreasing for several decades. In fact, way back into the 1960s and 70s, we have a trend pattern of decreasing area of sea ice, particularly at its minimum. And minimum sea ice occurs in September, at the end of the summer warming. But do have a look at the last few years. From 2007 onwards, the data points have been pulling way down below the straight line. And it becomes more and more obvious that straight line representations are no longer the appropriate statistical tool for demonstrating what is going on in the Arctic. Then we see it looks like the end of the Arctic sea ice area in September by about 2015.
Like that. And we push back the temperature record 11,000 years, and what you've got is this, you've got us coming out of the Ice Age back here, and then we've got a slow, gradual decline until the last century, and then this is us here. So we're pretty clear that something's changed in the last 200 years, and the only thing that we've been able to track down that really answers it is the greenhouse gases that human beings have been putting out.
What's going on in the Arctic area at the moment is probably the fastest moving response to global warming and climate change anywhere on the planet.
From here you are in the early 1900s till today. Blue is cooler than average, and yellow and orange are warmer than average. And you can see here it's still some blue areas and so on, but starting in the 1970s, you start to see the yellow and orange colors predominating. And by the time this ends, at 2010 or so, you can see what the world looks like today in this picture. There's warming everywhere. There's more warming over the continents than over the oceans. There's more warming in the north than in the south. And there's the strongest warming in the Arctic. This is a Mercator projection, so it exaggerates the area of the Arctic, but the warming is strongest in high northern latitudes. And that's because of a number of feedbacks that we think we understand, of which the most important is that when warming occurs in the far north, the ice and snow melt, as we've seen, and the ice and snow having melted reveal darker water and darker land that was under them, which reflect less sunlight and therefore absorb more sunlight. So the chain of events is carbon dioxide causes the warming melts snow and ice, the melted snow and ice make the surface darker, the darker surface absorbs more sunlight, and that adds to the warming.
The human trigger is now almost irrelevant. The feedbacks have taken over. And that means that sun's energy is being absorbed into the tundra, the frozen areas of the northern continental masses, and into the open ocean where the ice was, so that the whole system is now accelerating and accelerating and accelerating. And the hotter it gets, the faster it gets hotter. The faster it gets hotter, the more water vapor. The more water vapor, the faster it gets hotter. The faster it gets hotter, the less ice. The less ice, the less reflection. So the faster it gets hotter. You begin to get the idea? It has to be a downward curving, what we call exponential decay. And if you project that line forward, as is done in this particular setting of the equations and understanding of Arctic ice mass loss, then once again it shows zero ice floating on the Arctic Ocean by the end of summer 2015, which confirms precisely my own work on the decay of Arctic ice area to the same date. So the consequences for the Greenland ice cap are massive. And as it melts, it adds fresh water to the global ocean and starts to raise the sea level. And if it goes quickly, then we can expect 2, 3, 5, 7 meters of sea level change right across the world to happen on a decadal basis, i.e. within 10 to 20 years. That would be catastrophic for civilization, many of whose urban centers would be below sea level in the new situation. Let's move on now to the fourth consequence, and that is the impact on the tundra. Those land masses that border onto the Arctic Ocean now have a warmer, open sea coast, and the warmer air and the warmer temperatures are being fed back over the land mass. And of course what that does is increase the rate of melting of the tundra permafrost. And we get this depth of permafrost melt, or which we call the karst, increases year on year. That also has consequences. For instance, there's a lot of biological material in the deep freeze of the tundra, and as that thaws out, it begins to decay. The microbes have a field day, and out comes more carbon dioxide and more methane from the rotting vegetation. So methane is being released into the atmosphere, not only from the ocean floor, but also, as I said, from the melting of the tundra. And the more methane there is in the atmosphere, as this next slide shows, the greater the greenhouse effect. And methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas.
When the permafrost thaws, the organic matter in the permafrost thaws as well and begins to decay. The microorganisms start to eat it. If there's no oxygen, the microorganisms make methane. If there's oxygen, the microorganisms make carbon dioxide. Permafrost. Right here. Frozen dirt.
We found, as far as the organic matter coming out of this hill slope, is that it's much more bioavailable, meaning it's yummier for the microbes that are decomposing it than carbon or organic matter near the surface today. So that has climate implications, because that means that this organic matter is processed quicker. It's returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide and methane, and can feed back on climate that way. Sites like this, where the permafrost is releasing organic matter, act as accelerators. They speed up the process of human-caused climate change. So it's a large amplification of what we're doing. It feeds back onto our impacts. It's important to realize that the scale and rate of change that we're talking about now is several degrees, 2 to 5 degrees in just 100 years. So this is much faster than has happened in the last 50 million years. We're talking about unprecedented climate change and a very rapid, abrupt response from this ecosystem.
There have been changes in the Arctic in the permafrost in terms of the temperature over time, not only in the shallow layers near the surface, but at 10, 20, and 50 meter depths, you're seeing changes that are even more rapid. That indicates that not only is there heating near the surface, but that this heat is being transported to depth very efficiently.
This is the permafrost stores methane, as Richard was talking about. It's currently melting. It's warmer up there. It's like 5 degrees warmer up in the Arctic than it is. The average temperature of the world is only up a degree, but up in the Arctic it's up 5 degrees. And it's releasing 50 million tons per year, which is a billion tons of CO2, and it's obviously rising. If it all went, we'd basically all be dead. I mean, and it's happening now, and the problem here is it's accelerating. Once it starts generating, through this process or any of the other ones I talk about, once those processes generate more CO2 than we do, it won't matter if we stop completely. It's going to keep going. These are positive feedback loops. And by the way, it's not in the models.
The fifth implication of the Arctic dynamics concerns the feedback of the methane release. It is probably one of the most important issues that we have to examine.
We will be in danger of destabilizing these things called methane hydrates, which store a lot of methane at the bottom of the ocean in a kind of frozen form. 10,000 billion tons of the stuff, and they are known to be destabilized by warming.
This chunk of ice may look pretty unremarkable at first glance, but put a match to it and something amazing happens. As reported in this month's issue of The Atlantic, it's called methane hydrate, and it's actually not unusual at all. In fact, there are more than 100,000 trillion cubic feet of it on Earth. Volume-wise, that's like the size of the Mediterranean Sea. And it has a greater energy capacity than all the coal, oil, and natural gas on Earth combined. And while methane burns clean, unburned methane is a potent greenhouse gas, and if it leaks, it can be devastating to the environment. The USGS is confident leakage won't be a problem as long as proper precautions are taken.
There are potential irreversible effects of melting the sea ice. If it begins to allow the Arctic Ocean to warm up and warm the ocean floor, then we'll begin to release methane hydrate.
About 8 years ago, switched to studying the East Siberian Arctic shelf. And actually we've been studying it for the last 8 years, continuously, year by year by year, conducting 1 or 2 expeditions a year. That hydrocarbons are produced within the sedimentary drape was sealed and prevented the methane escape to the atmosphere. That is why we are telling that this should be the largest hydrocarbon stock in the world over there. There is a potential risk that if warming continues, the larger, maybe great and massive amount of methane could be released from this Siberian Arctic shelf. Of course, there is a potential risk. And in terms of potential risk, I would say that this Siberian Arctic shelf is the most potential because, as we said, the carbon pool is huge and the water is very shallow, and the warming occurs stronger than in different areas of the world ocean. And of course, it is a potential risk. So the methane in the atmosphere, the total amount of methane in the atmosphere, in the current atmosphere, it's about 5 gigatons. The amount of carbon preserved in form of methane in this Siberian Arctic shelf is approximately from hundreds to thousands of gigatons. And of course, it's only 1% of that amount is required to double the atmospheric burden of methane. But to destabilize 1% of this carbon pool, I think it's not much effort needed, considering that the state of permafrost and the amount of methane currently involved. Because what divides this methane from the atmosphere is a very shallow water column and a weakening permafrost, which is losing its ability to serve as a seal. And this is, I think it's not a matter of thousands of years. It's a matter of decades, I think. Maybe at most 100 years, but I think a matter of decades.
It would happen anytime.
It might potentially happen because I would list you many factors that might that are very convenient, convincing for us, so that might happen. Not any time. I think any time sounds like it might happen today. It might happen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow.
Might.
You think so?
I'm personally. No, but
Igor is a very convinced person because he spent a lot of time over there. And where the sea ice should be about 2 meters thick, it was 40 centimeters thick. That means that the processes, all the processes that serve destabilization of everything, of the sea ice, of the water column, of the currents increasing, the currents, I mean the movement of water beneath the sea ice increased. So everything looks anomalous. Even from our experience, from these 10 years, everything looks anomalous. And this is what makes him thinking that, making him think that the worst thing might happen.
no, we cannot exclude this. Maybe it's 1%, maybe it's less, but we cannot exclude because.
Shortly speaking, we do not like what we see there. Absolutely do not like.
Look at this. In a matter of days, just days, we're having this huge area. Look at this. Going, almost exploding with methane. The only way this is possible is by melting of methane clathrates. It's just the only explanation.
Hi, how long do you think we have before it becomes socially and otherwise unacceptable to emit carbon? And I mean, how radically do you think we have to act consensually?
Right, well, I mean, I think it's, the more we act, the better things will be for future generations. I mean, there's all sorts of estimates, and basically, if we do a huge amount within the next 10 years, we will still face quite an uncomfortable future. The less we do, the worse it will get. How much of it we can prevent depends on how bold we are, how much we're prepared to do, and that in turn is going to depend on changing social opinions.
What are the implications of all this for global dynamic behavior, both in climate and indeed for humanity as a civilization and the biosphere of which we are a part? Well, obviously, the Arctic is connected to the rest of the world. It is part of the world, and what happens in the Arctic inevitably has implications and consequences and spin-off for the rest of the planet. Socially, we know we will be beginning to remove some of the aerosols, the particulates in the atmosphere that at the moment are reflecting much of the solar energy back into space. We also know that much energy is being taken up by heating of the deeper ocean at the moment. And as the effects of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the global behavior as a whole begin to come back on stream, so global temperatures will begin to respond much as Arctic temperatures did. CO2 begins to increase temperature. Increased temperature drives water vapor feedback. Water vapor feedback accelerates heating. And then we begin to get hotter conditions for some of the tropical forests. We get burn and dieback and increased release of carbon dioxide from the biomass of the planet. It's a different set of feedbacks from that operating in the high Arctic, but it is nonetheless potent. And as in the Arctic, so tomorrow in the world as a whole. And if the implications of jet stream behavior and food production and Arctic dynamics spin off into our survival as a species, into our economics, into our food production, into the abandonment of the poor and the inability to sustain a population of 8, 9, 10 billion people. So also the increasing acceleration of global behavior, which will inevitably follow unless we are able to intervene, to slow it down, bring it to a halt, and reverse it. Then, without that intervention, global dynamics hold a dark future for humanity, a dark future for the biosphere of which we are a part. It is time to take action not only for the Arctic, but for the global crisis in which we are all placed.
There's not agreement on how much we need to do, how fast. To be honest, I don't think there needs to be, because the one thing I am certain of is that we will not do as much as the scientists say we need to do. That's why I've never sort of looked that closely at that particular question, because what the scientists say we need to do is over here, what we're currently doing is way over here, and what various global agreements have tried to get us to do and often failed is somewhere over here. So the gulf is so enormous that I mean, it's a perfectly fair question, but for that reason I've never really looked at it in that much detail. But I do believe that the more people believe this, that the more likely they are to act. So I suspect that there's also, denial can operate on many levels. You can sort of believe something factually, but not believe it deep down in your heart. And so if you say, oh yes, I accept climate change, but you just won't allow yourself on an emotional level to think about what is going to happen to the planet in the future, then you can sort of separate your everyday life from what you believe in the more academic side of your mind. So I think that in many ways changing social opinion is the most important thing we can do at present to deal with this problem, because then people might start moving towards what the scientists are saying we need to do.
We've got a lot of work to do and not much time to do it. As I look at the world, which is sort of where I start, we've got to cut carbon emissions fast. Then it becomes clear we need to cut carbon emissions 80%, not by 2050, but by 2020. For decades now, we environmentalists have been talking about the need to save the planet. But as I think about it, the planet's going to be around for a long time to come. What we need to save now is civilization itself. This is what's at stake.
Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future. I am here to speak for all generations to come. I am here to speak on behalf of the starving children around the world whose cries go unheard. I am here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet because they have nowhere left to go. And now we hear of animals and plants going extinct every day, vanishing forever. All this is happening before our eyes, and yet we act as if we have all the time we want and all the solutions. You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all in this together and should act as one single world towards one single goal. If a child on the streets who has nothing is willing to share, why are we who have everything still so greedy? I am only a child, yet I know if all the money spent on war was spent on finding environmental answers, ending poverty, and finding treaties, what a wonderful place this earth would be. At school, even in kindergarten, you teach us how to behave in the world. You teach us not to fight with others, to work things out, to respect others, to clean up our mess, not to hurt other creatures, to share, not be greedy. Then why do you go out and do the things you tell us not to do? You are deciding what kind of a world we are growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, everything's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world, and we're doing the best we can. But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. Are we even on your list of priorities? My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. You grown-ups say you love us, but I challenge you, please, make your actions reflect your words. Thank you.